Hello everyone and welcome to this edition of the Grumpy Pony podcast. In this edition I'm going to be talking to Joe McCullough, who is the creator and rules writer for Frostgrave and the upcoming Stargrave and Oathmark as well. So a really nice guy, sat down with me and we got a chance to chat over all the things that he likes about gaming. So it's much more of a narrative gaming that he goes for, and his games really sort of highlight that. So it's really nice to sit down with him and talk about all the stuff that he really loves as well. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Thanks very much, everyone. Hi, Joe, and welcome to the Grumpy Pony podcast. Thanks very much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
No worries at all. So for anyone that doesn't know you, Joe is responsible for writing things like Frostgrave. Am I right in saying Oathmark as well?
Yep, that's mine.
And the upcoming Stargrave as well. So going to be sitting down and chatting with Joe about that today. So first things first, Joe. How did you get into sort of writing rules in the first place for games? Because I know there's a lot of guys that come into my shop and they're always talking about, I'm writing rules for this and that, and they
right.
start scribbling down their own things. But how did you get into it sort of professionally?
Kind of backwards. So for a long time, I thought I wanted to be a writer, a fiction writer.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of years doing that and not getting real far, in all honesty. And I ended up going to work for Osprey Publishing. And over the years, I actually wrote a few books for them not in their military line, but I wrote a book on zombies and I wrote a book on dragon slayers and kind of various things. So I kind of transitioned from being a fiction writer into a nonfiction writer. And all this time, I've been a gamer. I've been a gamer my entire life, starting with role playing and then getting more heavily into kind of wargaming when I moved to Britain 15 years ago. And at this time, as I was working at Osprey, Osprey Games was kind of growing as its own entity. Osprey had put out a couple of war games, Field of Glory and a couple others. And one day I was sitting there talking to Phil Smith, who's now the head of Osprey Games, at the time was in charge of the line. And I was basically complaining about how there was no game that kind of did everything I wanted. I wanted a skirmish game with heavy campaign elements, and I wanted a lot of magic, and I wanted a lot of treasure, and I think he just basically got tired of listening to me and said, "Well, fine, just write your own rules, and if they're any good, I'll publish them." So I did. I just went off, and while I had done a lot of writing up to that point, and I'd done a lot of gaming up to that point, I hadn't really put them together. I'd done my own kind of scribbled rules here and there, but I'd never thought of really writing a rule set, but I went away and did it, and and I think it was great at that time because there was really no pressure on it at all. I wasn't doing it professionally, and I wasn't really doing it with an eye towards I'm going to get published. So I think that gave me a lot of freedom to kind of just I'm going to do whatever I want and be crazy with it. And luckily, as it turns out, my kind of gaming crazy is shared by enough other people that it was worth publishing. And credit to Phil when I did turn it in. He liked it enough and thought enough of it to really make a big deal out of it. To really get some really good artwork done for it, and to talk to North Star and getting some miniatures done for it. And, so
was it a bit of a trial and error process as well, though? So did you just sort of know when it was done, or was it a sort of a constant sort of tweaking for the first edition?
So before I set out to write it, I had a few weeks of kind of thinking, and most of that thinking revolved around the combat system, because I thought, if I can nail the combat system, since that's most of what happens in a war game, then I'll be okay. And I got to thinking, how do I want that to work? I decided early on I wanted to use a D20, partly because it gave a lot of range of possibilities, so mathematically it's useful, but also because it tied it back to kind of classic role playing. You know, the D20 is a role playing die traditionally, and I wanted to give the game some of that feel. And once I'd worked that out, and I basically wrote the game in kind of a my wife and I went on a trip to the Lake District for 2 weeks, and I wrote basically the game from the introduction to the end just over those 2 weeks. And while there was playtesting and a lot of tweaks after that, really the game was written in those 2 weeks, and everything else was just polishing. So yeah, it's never been that easy since then, to be honest. But
it's almost like
I think in some ways it's kind of like, I think it's one of those things where, like, in my head, I'd been writing the game my entire life.
Yeah.
So, and by the time I actually sat down, and I think because I'd had a lot of practice as a writer, the actual writing of the words wasn't too hard.
Yeah.
So it really just flowed out. Whereas I think a lot of guys who want to be game designers, a lot of guys who are game designers haven't necessarily practiced or trained as a writer, and thus they find that process of actually getting words down on the page quite difficult.
Yeah.
It really slows them down, even if they've got the mechanics, really hard. So,
yeah, just sort of that idea of communicating what you mean in these particular words as well.
Yeah, I mean, in truth, if you've gotten through college and written a bunch of essays, you got a good grounding.
Yeah.
In theory, that's what you're doing, is you're just trying to kind of communicate your arguments, or rules in this case. But I think it's a big advantage to have practiced both fiction and nonfiction, because I could kind of weave those elements together better. But
yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, as someone like I'm aware of D&D, and I've played a little bit of D&D, but I'm predominantly a war gamer. But I love the narrative side of the war game. So Frostgrave fits really perfectly for me in that little gap, where you can sort of create your own narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, growing up in the U.S. in the 80s, Dungeons & Dragons was the dominant game. If you were a gamer in the classic kind of, I play the other kind of games, that's the game you played. And every kind of the entire industry kind of grew out of that. And so to me, gaming was first and foremost about telling a story. But I also just learned to really love painting figures. And so in some ways I got more interested in using the figures as the basis of that story, as opposed to kind of theater of the mind. And then when I moved to Britain, kind of everything here kind of grows out of Games Workshop. Even as that in a way grows out of Dungeons & Dragons, it's kind of been restarted in this country with Games Workshop. And so I think I'm lucky in some ways that I've gotten to really experience these two different traditions of gaming.
Yeah.
And I think my games tend to kind of bring them together.
I think so. It's sort of, I don't know if it was intentional at all, but the way you've sort of designed the Frostgrave and obviously the second edition, it's very much open to the player to sort of create the story. You haven't sort of pigeonholed them into, you've picked this type of wizard, therefore you have to play it this way.
Yeah, it's funny, like, it's something I didn't discuss kind of as much as I probably should have in the first edition of Frostgrave. And that's partly because that's just the way I always gamed. And so I just kind of assumed that's the way everybody games, that's the way everybody thinks about it. And then Frostgrave comes out and I realized that's really not true. That's a lot of people have come to gaming through games that are much more prescribed. Yeah, you've got these characters, you've got to play it this way. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not the way I approach gaming. And so kind of as I went along and as second edition came along, I've talked more about kind of my philosophy and what makes the games fun for me, and what the system is, and the system is designed to do that. I think luckily enough people were able to kind of see that within the system of the first edition. They were able to kind of figure that out even as I hadn't spelled it out kind of in the text. So when creating that narrative, so for you personally as a gamer, like, the narrative is probably the most important. You're not, would I be safe in saying that you wouldn't be a tournament gamer? Yeah, no, I've played in tournaments here and there, usually because I'm just desperate to get some games in, and the tournament is the easiest kind of way to do that. But yeah, for me, it's all about, I mean, first and foremost, it's about gathering around a table and rolling dice and laughing with people I like, and if the game doesn't do that, I'm not interested. And that's why tournaments don't often work for me, because they're a little too tense, and intense. And I don't want to care whether I really win or not. In all honesty, that's not important. But yeah, I want to walk away from the table going, that was fun, and I feel like a story unfolded as we played. And I want an excuse to be able to kind of go home and continue to think about that story, So my wizard leveled up, and then we got this new treasure, and how am I going to change my group? And also, like, what does that mean? Like, where am I going to go next? And, and yeah, I tried very hard to, like, especially things like good and evil, Frostgrave is a world that has good and evil, but I leave it completely up to you to decide whether your wizard is good or evil, or, you can play a good necromancer. I'm not quite sure how, but, but if you want to, and you want to envision that way, why should I step on you? I want to give you as much freedom as possible. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that as well about the freedom, because a lot of the sort of wider knowledge I get from these games and things is when people come and tell me about their experiences with a certain game when they've been playing it. And it's really interesting. I've got one guy that comes in, and he was always looking for sort of the next game to play with his son, who's quite young, and they're always looking for games to play. And the interesting thing with Frostgrave is that they don't have to be against each other. And that's a great thing for him, like, because his son doesn't want to be against his dad. He wants to play And I just love the fact it provides that sort of level of, flexibility there. So you're not playing against the other player, you're playing against Frostgrave.
Right. Yeah, and that's something, like, as I've gone on, I've gotten into more. I mean, I guess, as I said, I was, as a role player first, I kind of wrote a war game to kind of feed some of my old role-playing need.
Yeah.
And as I've kind of gotten deeper into systems and things, I've tried to figure out ways to push that even farther by using cooperative play or scenarios where it's really about you versus the scenario more than your opponent. And just giving people different styles of game, because any game will eventually get stale if you don't have some kind of new take on it and new thing to try. So every time I write a supplement, I'm trying to think, like, what new am I giving the players? How is their game experience going to be different than the last time they gamed? And that's especially true if you're not a tournament gamer. The tournament gamer is about, all right, how can I tweak my army so that it's better? Here it's
and like, how do I crunch the numbers here and things like that. But
again, that's fine if that's the way you enjoy gaming, but it's not me. I want the next story and the next new experience, I guess.
So when Frostgrave, like, second edition came about, were you sitting there thinking, I don't want to do wholesale changes, I just want to tweak things and then go forwards? Or what did you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't even like, it wasn't like a desire to produce second edition because I want a second edition. It was more just, I'd watched the game played for 5 years, and I just kept seeing little kind of clunks here and there. It's just like, man, if I just said X instead of Y, that part would just be a little bit smoother, and after 5 years, I'd built up a pretty good list of those things. And I thought, what, if I could, to the point where it's kind of like, well, and they're not things I wanted to errata, because it's not things that didn't necessarily work. They worked, they just could have worked better. And I don't want to change rules I don't want to change rules if I don't have to, because it's confusing. But eventually I got enough of these that I thought, man, if I put all of these in, I can produce just a much more polished system than I had the first time. So that was the real goal, was just kind of, and I knew people like this game. Why mess with, I don't want to mess with the elements they like. I just want to make it just that little bit, faster, more logical, more balanced,
And just tidy it up and just keep the
Yeah.
core, but then just tidy up the edges, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Exactly. So, and also I very much like at that point, there's 8 or 9 supplements for the game, and like I know the frustration as a gamer when a new edition comes out, and I don't mind new editions at all. What I do mind is when the new edition invalidates all the stuff you've already bought. Other than the core rulebook, fine. It's time for a new core rulebook, but I don't want to have to also rebuy all 10 army books or supplements or whatever. So I worked really hard to make sure I'm not doing anything to mess those up, so that if you've already bought those are still relevant.
Yeah. So, so with Frostgrave, what was the inspiration for the actual the location of Frostgrave? Where did that come from?
I'm not 100% sure. I found about a year ago, I actually found kind of my original little notes for the game, and realized that originally I'd actually set it in a desert.
Right.
But that must have been tossed out really early on. And I can't say 100% like I decided to set it in a frozen city because of X, but looking kind of through my life, I'm drawn to this kind of one trip I took, which it was a Christmas present I got from my wife. I bought us tickets to go to Tallinn, capital of Estonia, because neither of us had ever been. We barely knew where it was on a map, but I'd seen a picture of the city, and oh man, it's so medieval. It looks amazing. And I thought, I'll surprise her. It'll be a Valentine's Day gift, right? Well, I gave it to her on Christmas, but to go at Valentine's Day. And of course, knowing nothing about Estonia, I didn't think, Baltic country in the middle of February is going to be really cold. I mean, literally, like, so we flew to Germany to fly on to there. And like in Germany, they're like de-icing the plane to get us there. And we fly into a snowstorm essentially and land. And, that night we were there, like a foot of snow fell and stayed the entire week we were there. And it never got above 0 the entire time we were there. And actually that turned out to be amazing because it meant the city was like empty. There were no tourists.
Yeah.
You could go anywhere, do anything. It did mean you didn't want to stay outside more than about 30 minutes and then you were diving into a cafe, but that's why we were there anyway.
Yeah.
But Tallinn, the old town, is just this beautifully preserved medieval city. It's got town walls and towers everywhere and Russian Orthodox churches, all these spires. And we're just there in, sub-zero temperatures. There's snow everywhere, and it feels kind of abandoned, And I think in the back of my mind, that's where I got this idea of like, because I knew I wanted a dead city in the, in one sense, and I think that was there. Like this is in some ways the most dead city I've been in that's actually a city. Like I know there's people here, but I don't see them, and everything's still and quiet and kind of creepy, but also it's medieval and
Yeah, sure.
So,
oh wow. Oh, amazing. So it all sort of ties in. It's got to be there. It's got to be there. That was the inspiration.
Yeah, it does. And in fact, I wrote that story down somewhere, and Terrace Cassidy, who runs a company called Geek Nation Tours, turns out he's a big Frostgrave fan, and it ended up organizing a tour to Tallinn. So 12 of us went there for, I guess, a week. I can't remember, about a week, and basically did tourist stuff during the day, and then we played Frostgrave all night, and it was just that fantastic experience.
Yeah,
you play
sounds great fun.
Frostgrave in the kind of basement of this medieval, what's been turned into a hotel, but and outside it's freezing, and it was just great experience and great tying it together that way.
No, that sounds like it would have been great fun. I'd be surprised if they're still not doing that.
Well, it was lucky that so that was in the February, because we were trying to get all the freezing and snow this time, but in the February before lockdown. So literally, like, I remember flying out there, hearing the news about COVID, and it's coming and everything. But of course, at that point, you're like, yeah, whatever. And then you come back and you realize, bam, that is the last thing you're going to do for 16 months or whatever. So I actually feel really fortunate we got it in.
Yeah. Well, hopefully when we're all back out of lockdown, we can start getting back to that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the reasons why I started this podcast was because of lockdown and just trying to reach out to people and just shout about our shop as well, So but it's been great in a way for me because I've had a chance to meet people like yourself and loads of other creators and things. So, trying to take the positives where you can, I guess.
Yep. I think you have to, or you go crazy. So.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, right. So that's Frostgrave, and obviously, really want to talk to you about Stargrave as well. So the pre-orders for that, I think, are going up either soon or already up when this is being recorded. So with Stargrave, was that? Are we looking at a sort of Frostgrave in space, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's been this kind of online controversy about whether it's a reskin or not, and the answer to that really comes down to what you believe a reskin is. I mean, is it Frostgrave in space? Yes, on one level. It's using the same kind of core D20 mechanics that Frostgrave uses.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I don't like to call it a reskin because that makes it sound like I didn't do any work. It's like, actually, this was a lot of work. Because, it is more than just changing, a bow to a gun. The entire way the flow of the game plays has changed. So in Frostgrave, you're very focused on these wizards, and it's what spells you cast that really kind of determine the outcome of the game more than anything else. And you've got a system somewhat like that in Stargrave. So in the Stargrave, you have your captain and your first mate, and they have these powers that in some ways overlap the wizards. So if you want to play a kind of space wizard, you can, but there's a lot of other kind of options. So you can play like a soldier or a rogue, and their powers are very different than kind of things that were seen in Frostgrave, and a lot of the powers are less direct. They're more about, your soldier can kind of coordinate the fire among the group, and and tweak the weapons beforehand, one of the things I found when playtesting it, which I didn't fully appreciate, even though I probably should have, is just handing everybody a gun in the game makes for a much different game. Because in Frostgrave, you do have your archers and stuff, but essentially everybody has to kind of run at each other and beat on each other with sticks.
Yeah.
But if you give everybody a projectile weapon, all of a sudden running at the enemy no longer makes a lot of sense. So the flow of the game works really differently. And then it was about figuring out how that new flow worked with the kind of powers that you would have.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found was, in Frostgrave, your wizard casting a spell is the biggest, scariest thing that can happen. In Stargrave, that's actually not true. The biggest, scariest thing that can happen is a guy fires a grenade right into the midst of your guys. So how can I tweak those powers so that there's still things you want and things that influence the game, that still keeps those characters relevant and the best characters. And that really kind of, so it was kind of finding that balance and that mesh. And I think, and what I hope is that, again, you get a really different play experience playing Stargrave than you do playing Frostgrave. I do want you to be a very narrative driven and story driven, but that you're thinking about how you move your pieces differently, and the decisions you make during the game are different, so that you actually have a reason to say, I'd rather play Stargrave than Frostgrave tonight, not just because I feel like spaceships instead of trolls.
No, I totally get that. So with the background, what's the background with Stargrave this time round? Because with Frostgrave, obviously everyone's coming down onto this one city.
Right. Yeah, which in some ways proved a lot easier, to kind of contain everything. Whereas, in Stargrave, the background, and I try to keep the background pretty light on all my games so that the players can interpret it in their own way. But essentially, you had these two great empires in this galaxy. They went to war and just mutually annihilated each other. And so now there's there's these kind of big pirate fleets that roam around and kind of take whatever they want. And there's nobody to stop them because there's no central authority left.
Yeah.
And so you're playing the captain of what I call the independent crews, which is a small group that basically flies around trying to make a living, but has to kind of keep quiet about it because there's these giant pirate fleets who will stomp on anyone who either, is making too much money or is threatening them or whatever. But so again, I want to leave it completely up to the players to like why you're flying around,
Yeah.
The name of the game is still about, getting stuff, but you can have very different reasons for why you want that stuff. If you want to play the rebels and you're building up your forces and your power to strike back at the pirates, that's great. You can do that. If you want to be a bounty hunter, you can just be a bounty hunter. If you want to be, an art collector who's flying, the ruins of the galaxy looking for the Mona Lisa, you can do that. And some of the captain backgrounds will kind of lean more to that than the other. But again, there's no reason you can't have a cyborg art collector or a
so again,
psionic freedom fighter.
Yeah.
So
you're just giving us that sort of flexibility again to just sort of go into it how we want.
Yeah. I mean, the kind of horrible freedom of it, of course, is I have this entire galaxy to play with. Literally like anything you can imagine. You don't even have to justify it. It's just like there's an infinite number of planets. You can just, if you've got the terrain, throw it on the table. You're playing Stargrave. That makes it a little more difficult to write scenarios, and I worried about it for a while, and then I just went, forget it. So I got scenarios set on swamp planets. I got them set in spaceships, and I talk a little bit more than I did in Frostgrave say about like, don't worry about this. If I say swamp and you don't have swamp, that's fine. Set it in a forest.
Yeah.
Just, if I say put a building here, put a building here. It doesn't really matter what the building looks like. It can be, a bunker or it can be a ruined farmhouse. Just put the building there. And so I hope people see it as, one of the reasons I write these games is just to give people the excuse to collect the stuff they want. Because that's what I always wanted. It's one of the main reasons I wrote Frostgrave was I had a bunch of wizard figures and no game to play with a bunch of wizard figures. So, and I just want you to go like, oh, there's a cool alien model. I really want that. Oh, and there's my justification. I can work it into a Starcraft.
Might as well get a crew for him now as well. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm a facilitator. That's
yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's brilliant. So, we'll talk about like the challenges with Stargrave. Then, did you find as well that I suppose would it have been more challenging? You're saying like just coming up with the ability, sure, but then what about the different the sort of when you're talking about sci-fi technology, which could essentially do anything a spell could
anything.
Do. So you've always got that same sort of challenge there again, haven't you? Of it being so wide spanning that you're like, where do I start?
Yeah. Luckily, by the time I came to do Stargrave, I kind of had a lot of experience doing that sort of thing, and it's funny because that's one of the few times during the game construction process where I start with mechanics as opposed to kind of narrative. I like to, I write kind of the basic rules for the game, and then all the powers, in the same way as all the spells, tend to be kind of like about breaking the rules. Like how can I allow you to break the rules that won't break the game, but do something interesting during it. And so in this case, when I wrote Frostgrave, I did that, but while tying it to kind of schools of magic to kind of give me an anchor point. And here I used backgrounds. So like I said, you got the cyborg, or you've got the robot expert, you've got the soldier. And so I started to think like, what kind of powers could a soldier have? And they're not powers in the kind of superhero sense in this case. In fact, I just called them powers because I couldn't think of anything better that covered all these different things. In the case of the soldier, it's more like skills or kind of tricks he's learned and that sort of thing. But so I kind of did like, here's my list of things I'd like a soldier to be able to do. Of course, then I broke it by saying that, even if you're a soldier, you could still have a power from over here. You just won't be quite as good at it, kind of thing, because I want people to feel free to mix and match. But by having those anchor points, it really helped me kind of
Yeah, and I
thing,
think
because it is infinite possibility.
yeah, well, narratively that makes sense as well, because if these guys are sort of flying around the galaxy, they're meeting new people, they might learn a skill just a little bit, but not enough to really master
Yeah,
it.
exactly. And I just like, I want to give, again, players the ability to like just chart their own destiny. So you can, if you're going along and you think, oh, I just really wish my guy could do this one trick, then okay, he can have it, and you can even develop that. But, that's what you're focused on. But, to be honest, it also helps with balance because, if everybody can theoretically have everything, you don't have to balance it in the same way as if you can say, only dwarves can do this and only elves can do that.
Yeah, and it's a nice narrative, for people like myself that just absolutely love narrative. You can build your character's story just by the abilities that they have, and I think that's a really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted people to, one of the reasons I kept that background light is I want people to be able to set the game in kind of their favorite sci-fi universe if that's what they want. So, it's pretty easy to transport it to Star Wars. All of a sudden the pirates become the Imperials.
Yeah.
And, you can play Han Solo, you can play a Jedi, whatever, by just combining the powers in the way that you want. Or Firefly, because if Firefly is probably a better fit because you've got this kind of past war that's kind of left everything ruined. It works for Star Trek if you've seen Discovery and you're in the Future Federation where it's falling apart. But that was actually a useful one for me because I kind of at points I would think like the galaxy is now at Star Wars level. It used to be at Star Trek level,
Right.
So when I'm writing kind of advanced tech you can find, I'm thinking this is something that they would have had in Star Trek, but they don't have in Star Wars. So it's a real treasure to find it, So it was good for me to kind of have those kind of things in my head and use it. But then kind of generify it so that people can see it any way they want.
Yeah, and give people that reason just to keep sort of digging around for new stuff as well. And there's always going to be some sort of trinket. Yeah.
Exactly. And, and then, you can layer alien civilizations in there if you want. And, again, anything. And while that's amazing as a creator, it's also really hard. And the hard part for me this time was writing a bestiary. Because in Frostgrave, I was able to go like, first I'm just going to do some generic fantasy monsters, the ones everybody uses. Then I'm going to do like cold weather stuff. And I'm going to do demons because we have wizards that deal with demons and undead. Then you get to Stargrave and I'm like, the entire galaxy.
Yeah.
Every form of life you can imagine exists in some corner. What the heck am I going to put in the book?
Yeah. Was there a temptation?
That actually.
Was there a temptation to go? Oh, sorry, there's a bit of a delay. No, all I was going to say.
You go ahead.
Yeah, so was there a temptation to go down, say, like the sort of H.P. Lovecraft route of these sort of tentacle?
So there's kind of one of those, and there's a animal called the Warpound who's kind of based on the Hounds of Tyndalos, in that like he just shows up, he just kind of appears and basically he just wants to kill someone and you have no idea why. And once he kills somebody, he blips out again, and it's just kind of, oh, what was that? It's totally random. But so I like to add a little bit of that element. I don't want to kind of bring it in too heavy because it's such a strong flavor.
It is,
it's very much a flavor of doom. And while that, you can certainly play Stargrave that way. I mean, you're in a devastated galaxy after all, so it is kind of grim. But I do want to leave it open so that if, you are the light in that galaxy and, you are fighting for a better future, then you can do so. But if you want to revel in the grimness, you can do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, brilliant. Well, the last thing I wanted to talk about, and it's the same thing I talk to everyone about when I do a podcast, is what's on your hobby table at the moment.
Well, I can literally show you because my hobby table is right in front of me as I speak. So I've got it. You probably won't be able to see it, but so I'm doing some snake men, which so the Reaper kind of bones. I think they call them Nagundra or something like that. But for Ghost Archipelago, which is the Frostgrave spinoff set in Jungly Islands. And I've also got some of the new BattleTech battle mechs that they put out, the new plastic ones, which I'm a big BattleTech universe fan from back in the day. I don't really play the game very much, but they finally, I think, put out some models that are as cool as their background after 30 years of having kind of wonky looking robots. They finally put out some really good ones. So I'm doing that. And a friend just sent me Star Wars Legion, which I'm both thankful for and curse him for, because I've been striving to not get into it. Really, the only reason I didn't want to get into it is because it's 35 mil or whatever scale it is, and it just doesn't quite fit with everything else I've got. So I was like, no, I'm gonna find out about it. So, who doesn't want to paint a few rebels? So
it's such a draw, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly, and they'll be perfectly usable for Stargrave as long as I use all of them, and if not, there's bits and pieces I can use from it, but generally I like, with Frostgrave or Stargrave, I buy the miniatures and then I tend to worry about what I'm using them for.
Yeah.
For me, the whole hobby starts with the miniatures. Those look cool. I'm gonna buy those. I'm gonna paint those. And if there's a game to go with it, I'll try that out. If I don't like that game, I'll take the miniatures and I'll use them for this other game. So,
the rule of
like
the
mechs.
way to go.
Exactly. I know these battle mechs will fit right into Stargrave. If you want the big clunky robot in your gang, you can just chuck one of them in. And, so looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And hopefully when we all get back out and we can start gaming in the shop and stuff like that, it'd be great to get some campaigns of Stargrave, Frostgrave going. I think, like I say, there's a few guys that play at the moment, but we're looking to do some sort of campaigns and things in the shop. I think it'd be really good fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that I've grown to understand, which has always been true of me, but I didn't fully kind of appreciate till recently, is how much of wargaming takes place away from the actual game table. How much of the enjoyment of the hobby I get. And obviously there's painting, but just thinking about it, getting ready for a game and talking about the game afterwards. And so I'm very much trying to kind of craft games now that help facilitate that, and give you, so you got that narrative and you build it while you play, and then that just gets you fired up for the next one. And, hopefully while you're in the gaming store, you see the new X model and you're thinking, next scenario we play, there's going to be one of those on the table, I haven't figured out how we're getting it in there yet, but we're getting it in there.
Yeah, it's going in somehow.
Exactly. He's
Joe,
going to be in that house to investigate.
Yeah. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for
no problem.
joining this in the podcast. This is probably going to be going up, either in the next day or two. So going up, so I can let you know as soon as it's going to go up. Thanks so much for joining me. And
no problem.
Yeah,
thanks very much.
Okay, everyone, so that was Joe for this week, talking about Frostgrave and the hotly anticipated Stargrave. Thank you all so much for all your continued support, and all the downloads and the pod and the support I've been getting through the shop as well. It's really greatly appreciated for our little shop and our hobby community in the middle of the Kent. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you again next time.